Well, good morning, Southern Oregon, and welcome to the Real Estate Show, Southern Oregon's one and only weekly real estate show, bringing you local stats, information, and what's happening. Pete Belcastro, Alice Lima, we're both brokers at John L. Scott. Pete, welcome. How are things going with you this week?
Well, they're fine. And first of all, last week, congratulations, your first solo show by yourself, and
We
way to
didn't tell
go.
anybody that.
That because that's a milestone, doing it by yourself the first time, and you did it and you did great. So that's quite wonderful. It's good to be back with you, actually. So look, we're in midsummer right now, that summer selling season. We always talk about it hitting the peak, around the first part of August, and then it starts to kind of slowly work down the other way. So, I don't know, Alice, we've talked about plateauing in the market a little bit, and I think that's happened. We'll share it with people in our last segment, some of those latest stats that we've received to kind of bears this out. So, yeah, there's still, there's still a lot of demand, but it doesn't seem to be as much. Homes are on the market a little bit longer than they were, although, they're still, if they're priced right and in great condition, they're still moving pretty quickly. But overall, the smoke has not helped us, as you know. A lot of people canceled this last few weeks. But look, we got some rain this week. That has been a blessing for these fires that have just plagued all around us. Thanks to the firefighters who are out there, including my son, who goes out there into the bootleg fire. So maybe we're getting things under control. Maybe we're going to have a good, clean August, where we don't have smoke and things pick back up for people who are especially out enjoying the outdoors right now.
Well, and it's interesting because we're in a slightly different cycle because we had so many delays because of the shutdowns. And I'm really curious to see if we have our normal tapering off in August and September going into the fall, or if things stay pretty steady. We'll just have to keep an eye on it and see what happens. But that's why it's good to have a weekly show like this so people can be informed.
It's easy to talk about the previous 3 months because we all know what happened there. It's the next 3 months that is, of course, up in the air. Hey, today on the show, you're going to be doing an interview with Tia Politi, who's from the Oregon Rental Housing Association. What a great time, Alice, to talk to her about the rental market and what's happening around the state in our own communities. It's a timely topic. Can't wait to hear what she has to say. And then we'll come back in the last segment and update people on kind of what's going on in the market around our region.
Yeah. And, with the state of Oregon legislative sessions this year, she was involved in some of that. So, it should be a great interview. So we're going to take a quick break right now. Thanks to our sponsors, the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, John L. Scott, Southern Oregon, and Guy Giles Mutual of Omaha Mortgage. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm Alice Lima, broker John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon. And today I am so excited to introduce Tia Politi. She is the president of the Oregon Rental Housing Association and the Rental Owners Association of Lane County. She's also a landlord tenant instructor all across Oregon. She's an eviction specialist. She's not an attorney, but she's an eviction specialist. And she also operates the rental housing support services, providing consultation, education, and eviction services to housing providers. That's quite a mouthful. Welcome, Tia.
Thank you so much for having me, Alice.
Well, I am so excited to have you on because in Oregon, it's difficult and tricky to be a landlord. It's also difficult and tricky to be a tenant. And you're just right in the thick of things with the latest information. So how about we start with what's new and changed since January?
That's a loaded question, my dear. Where do I start?
Where do you start?
Well, certainly since January, landlords have been able to terminate tenancy for all of the 4 qualifying landlord reasons. Prior to that, we were restricted to only 2 of the 4 reasons. I assume your listeners know what those are, but
why don't you circle back and go through those 4 real quick?
Okay. So the 4 reasons that a landlord can terminate include a landlord who wants to demolish the unit or convert it to a different use within a reasonable time. The landlord needs to occupy the unit as their primary dwelling unit within a reasonable time. The landlord needs to renovate the unit, and the renovation will render the unit unsafe or unfit for occupancy. The fourth reason is a property sale to a buyer who will occupy as their primary residence. All of those termination notices require a minimum 90-day period and require that the landlord provide what are called supporting facts. That's a tricky thing. These termination allowances came about as part of Senate Bill 608 that was passed back in February 28th of 2019. It's been quite the confusing ride for many landlords. And of course, during the emergency period of COVID, so the emergency period, for those of you who aren't aware, began April 1st of 2020 and it ended June 30th of 2021. We are now in the grace period. The grace period has been extended to February 28th of 2022. So in regards to the methods of termination, one of the governor's executive order, I believe it was 20-56, back in 2000, did allow for the property sale to a buyer who would occupy. Then on October 1st of 2020, we were allowed the landlord to occupy, or landlord or immediate family member to occupy. And then as of January 1st of this year, the other two reasons, the demolish or convert to a different use, or the renovation that will render the unit unsafe or unfit for occupancy. So all four of those reasons are still allowed. We do have some concerns for landlords who want to terminate on any of those four reasons. If the tenancy's been in place for less than a year, that was actually brought up to us by Michael Stout, a Medford attorney, who is part of the Southern Oregon Rental Owners Association. So we really don't know, because the other methods of termination, for example, the 30-day no cause, were prohibited until July 1st. We weren't sure what would happen if a landlord gave one of those 90-day notices for a tenancy of less than a year. So there's been a lot of confusion. Even with me, I'm on the legislative committee and I'm really aware of what's going on. I've testified again, in regards to bills, and the new overlays that we're dealing with now are additionally confusing. And I'd be happy to talk about those for a few minutes.
Yeah, wow, there's just so much going on. When they passed all these laws, it was really difficult because we had so much vagueness about how to implement, and it's taken all this time to test it. And that I just wish there had been more guidance and more specific implementation of the practice, because it left so many of the landlords hanging, and the tenants.
It really did. And it was very frustrating for the landlord advocates because, the tenant advocates basically wrote these bills with very little input from us, some input, but the bills certainly could have been better. I believe, I believe a well-rounded bill includes input from all sides.
Yes.
We're certainly working toward, influencing those tenant advocates to include us. We do feel that many of the measures that were taken were necessary at the time. Right? Mass evictions help no one. We completely understood that to a point. We're thrilled now that at least under the new Senate bills, we're operating under the new overlays that last through February 28th of next year, that the landlords have a better understanding of what their rights and obligations are. And right now, finally, the tenants have to prove something. I think that's been one of the most frustrating parts of the entire moratorium, was tenants didn't have to do anything. Tenants didn't have to prove anything. I hear the anecdotal stories of my tenant isn't paying rent, but they're a school teacher and they're still teaching, and they just have a new car in the driveway, and they just posted pictures of their Hawaii vacation on their Facebook page.
Oh,
so certainly, you can imagine how
heart.
frustrating that is, especially for an owner. For example, I think of myself as being pretty typical of our membership across the state. My husband and I own 4 rental units. We work full time. We do rentals on the weekends, and we have mortgages to pay, $6,000 in mortgages every month. And so for other housing providers such as ourselves, that was an extremely frustrating place to be when you're, working so hard, your tenants are still working, especially then, and you're not getting paid. Now, having said that, one of my renters was a really great example of why these laws were needed. One of my renters, my longest term renter, just adore her. She's fabulous. She's been with us since 2005. She takes great care of the property, always pays rent on time, very communicative, and all the things you want in this business relationship. But she works in the medical field, and her son and her were both thrown out of work immediately in March of 2020. She immediately notified me. I told her, don't worry, we'll figure this out. You know, I will give you whatever time you need, and let's hope that rent assistance comes through. And certainly it has for her. She and her son have received rent assistance that covered June of 2020 through October 2021 of this year. Which has
Wow.
really, really helped her, and it's helped us. I would hate to have thought of her ending up at the end of this crisis with this giant debt hanging over her head. So we're certainly very grateful for the money that the federal government has given to the states and that the state has distributed to renters who are truly in need.
And that does make sense because that's the human thing to do. But boy, that's really tough when you've got people with good jobs and they're spending their money and you're really lying awake at night because you don't know how you're going to pay your bills. And you might actually end up losing the property to a foreclosing bank because of all that. And I know the forbearance and all that was supposed to help, but it all seemed a little too little too late.
It's helped a certain segment, I'm sure. I also, one of the things I do as part of my business, I staff 5 landlord helplines around the state. And, you know, the stories I've heard from people around the state include stories about having to refinance the property so that they could continue to pay the mortgage and pay their own bills. Many of our landlords across the state are elderly and like my husband and I, built up a small portfolio of rentals to support them in their retirement. And this is their source of income. And it is, you know, they still have mortgages to pay, taxes, insurance, maintenance. We were not relieved from any of the requirements to maintain a habitable dwelling unit, to you know, keep addressing the big ticket items that fail, like roofs and heat pumps and all sorts of things like that. And so, yes, it created a severe hardship for housing providers in some cases. Certainly, you know, I think there's a great perception that landlords are all these rich people, and certainly
Right.
there's a certain segment of housing providers who are quite wealthy and may own their units free and clear. So I know it's hard to engender sympathy for those folks. But for our smaller private housing providers, it was extremely painful in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what the percentage of tenants during the shutdown did not pay their rent? Do we have any numbers yet?
Yeah, we do. You know, they've ranged, you know, varied wildly, excuse me, anywhere from 14% to 28%, which was actually better than we thought. At first, we were really expecting a huge jump in renters who aren't paying, but by and large, the majority of renters continue to pay their rent in full. You know, one of my renters, even though she continued to work, ran into some financial difficulties with medical bills. And so she still owes us a couple of months rent from the emergency period. And unfortunately, we were not able to apply for assistance on her behalf because we're related. She's my niece by marriage. And that was a, you know, kind of a barrier, which was unfortunate. We had really hoped strongly that Senate Bill 330 would have passed this session, which would have allowed housing providers to take a dollar for dollar tax credit and forgive that rent owing. You know, many landlords are going to end up in a situation where they never got paid, their tenant's gone, they can't pursue them in collections until March 1st of next year, and then the tenant's going to declare bankruptcy and wipe out the entire debt.
Oh my goodness.
Many thousands of dollars. I am aware that there's a few lawsuits pending around the state regarding things like that, where many housing providers saw this as an illegal taking under the US Constitution. We'll see how those lawsuits play out.
Any idea when those are going to go to court?
No, but you know, the courts were extremely delayed. There was an enormous backlog because the courts were virtually closed for let's see, in Lane County where I am, courts were shut down in April of 2020, and we weren't even able to get back to court before September 1st. So
yeah,
that's, you know, April, May, June, July, August, that's 5 months that the courts were shut down. And that was really challenging, especially when you were dealing with for-cause terminations, especially 24-hour notices for harm or substantial damage where the tenants committed an egregious, outrageous act, drug dealing, things like that. We couldn't get them out. And that was extremely challenging, not only for housing providers, but for law enforcement.
Yeah, it's been quite a mess. It's been like that down here too. So why didn't that bill pass, do you think?
I just didn't gender enough, enough support. I believe that the legislature felt that the $25 billion from the Trump administration and an additional $25 billion from the Biden administration distributed to the states would be enough. And I think in many cases it's going to be. What it's not going to help are those owners whose tenants bailed on them and they'll never find them again. And yes, they can send them to collections and maybe get a money judgment on their credit report, but they're out the money. Now we're
Wow.
operating under two Senate bills I think your listeners should be aware of, Senate Bill 278 and Senate Bill 282. One of the biggest requirements that we've seen and people need to be aware of is that regardless of your guest limitation statutes, renters are allowed to have a guest for up to 15 calendar days in a year. And beyond that,
Regardless of what they sign in their contract with you?
yes, that's correct. And that's challenging because it's always hard to prove an unauthorized occupant, but then you're allowed to, require them to meet your screening criteria and be added to the rental agreement with a temporary occupancy agreement. That agreement may not expire prior to February 28th of 2022.
Oh my goodness. Well, Tia Politi, we just are getting so much great information. We've got to take a quick break right now. We're speaking with Tia Politi, the president of the Oregon Rental Housing Association and the Rental Owners Association of Lane County. She's also the owner of Rental Housing Support Services. We've got our sponsors coming back just for a quick brief, and that's going to be the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, Guy Giles Mutual of Omaha Mortgage, and our very own John L. Scott of Southern Oregon. We appreciate you all very much. Do not touch that dial. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back, Southern Oregon, to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lima, broker John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon, and we're having one of the best interviews we've had ever with Tia Politi. She's the president of the Oregon Rental Housing Association and the Rental Owner Association of Lane County. She's also the owner of the Rental Housing Support Services. And we, before the break, Tia, you were just starting to talk about some of the new Senate bills that were coming up that we're operating under now. So why don't we go back and talk about Senate Bill 278 and 72?
Okay, so both bills, the combination created some definite overlays for us that will last through February 28th of 2022. There will be some overlays that remain permanent in regards to screening. So basically, renters who are evicted during the either the emergency or grace periods will be eligible to have their evictions expunged. And landlords in the screening process are not allowed to count debt owed by the tenant that accrued during that emergency period in reporting rental history to another housing provider. That's one of the things that we really need to be aware of. So if you are a home owner housing provider whose tenant moved out or is still in place and is applying for other rentals, and owes you money from that emergency period, they're not considered to be in default in that amount until February 28th. And so when you're answering those rent history questions, you need to be very careful about what you say. I'm recommending to my membership that they say something to the effect of the tenant is not currently in default, because that's how the law looks at it. They're not considered to be in default until we pass that 11:59 p.m. on February 28th.
Interesting.
So that's one of the overlays as well. The evictions are not allowed to be counted against them during this time. What's very frustrating for us is that includes for-cause evictions. However, remember, you can always get a rental reference from that landlord regarding the tenant's behavior and use or abuse of the property. We have the guest restriction, which is does have a limitation in regards to occupancy standards. So for your listeners who aren't aware, occupancy standards set by the state of Oregon and by HUD can be no more restrictive than 2 per bedroom without good cause. So, and there's even some more leeway depending on the size of the unit, the size of the bedroom. So you do need to be careful. If your tenant has a guest that overstays, you're allowed to screen them for everything except credit and income. And so if they have terrible criminal history, terrible behavior in another rental, you can say no to that and require that they vacate the premises. If they do qualify in regards to criminal history and conduct, then you're required to add them to the rental agreement with a temporary occupancy agreement. Typically, the landlord can choose how long that agreement lasts under the mandates of Senate Bill 282. the agreement may not end prior to February 28th of 2022. And there's a lot of things that make sense about that, especially when we consider that people, some very responsible people have said, I can't pay the rent, I'm moving out, and they're doubling up with friends and family. We also have the terrible wildfires that occurred last year. We had 40,000 Oregonians displaced by those fires, and many of them are still living in hotels. So, there's certain aspects of these bills that make sense, right? We're not heartless monsters. We understand that there's been some terrible crises and tragedies. And so just know that if you are faced with this as a housing provider, the limit is the occupancy standard set by HUD. They especially want you to be careful about not discriminating against families with children. So let's see, what else? You've got the screening requirements, you've got that. The best thing for us is that we can now serve non-payment of rent notices for July rent moving forward. Remember, there's protected debt that it was accrued during the emergency period, regardless of whether the tenant signed a declaration of financial hardship. That is protected debt. You cannot do anything about that. And if you even send your tenant a reminder about that debt, you must include a statement that eviction for rent, fees, and other charges that accrued during the emergency period, and the date has to be in there, April 1st of 2020 to June 30th of 2021, is not allowed prior to February 28th of 2022. So be very careful. The penalties have dramatically increased as part of these bills. The penalties for retaliation have increased to 3 times the monthly rent plus triple tenant damages. We need to be very careful. I'm letting people know that if you have a tenant, you want to give that no cause notice, which you're allowed to do now as of July 1st. If that tenant owes protected debt, you better not serve that notice. But let me get back to the non-payment of rent. So now we can serve that 10-day non-payment of rent notice. Remember, it's a 10-day notice through next February 28th. And you must include a special form. It's called Important Notice About Your Rights to Protection from Eviction. It's available on the Oregon Rental Housing Association website. And if you use our form store, that form is going to automatically print out with either the 10 or 13-day notice, as well as our notice of termination with cause if you're using that notice to collect monies. That notice is going to let the renter know that if they apply for rent assistance, they're going to get a 60-day pause on any enforcement actions related to non-payment. If at the end of the 60-day period, the landlord has not been paid, the state is working up some lovely bureaucratic red tape process for us to get reimbursed for those 2 months of rent. And the landlord can then serve a new 10-day notice or 13-day notice for non-payment of rent for the following rental period and move forward. What's great about this is that if your renter qualifies and they owe you money from that protected period, from the emergency period, they're going to get all of that paid to you plus 3 months moving forward. And so that's the really good news. Where renters now actually have to do something. They can't just say, no, I don't or I can't pay the rent. Now they actually have to do something. There's another overlay I want your listeners to be aware of, and that is the CDC moratorium extension. So that moratorium extension previously was less restrictive than our pandemic related executive orders and House bills. So for that reason, we weren't under the mandates of the CDC moratorium, but now the CDC moratorium for the month of July is more more restrictive than what we have. So if your tenant does provide you with a CDC declaration, my attorney is recommending that we do not file on any non-payment. That runs through the end of July. We're not expecting it to be extended, but stay tuned. We just don't know what's coming.
Yeah. And
one of the things I'd also like to really, I just can't stress this strongly enough. Every day in my business, see defective notices. I see housing providers who really don't know how to prepare and serve a legal notice. And I'm going to pick on you realtors for a little bit here too. I am seeing way too many realtors giving their clients legal advice and preparing and serving notices that they are not qualified to prepare and serve. And in almost every case that's brought to me, I'm dealing with a couple of them right now. They messed up. You've got to start over again. So I just can't stress strongly enough how important it is that you know how to prepare and serve a legal notice.
Well, and let's talk about real quick is what notices are a real estate agent, realtor allowed?
Well, typically, the notice is going to be for a property sale to a buyer who wants to occupy, right? So if you're selling your investment property and the buyer is just going to buy it as an investment property, there's nothing that needs to happen. The tenant is part of the sale. But what we're seeing, of course, because of this hot housing market, are people who want to occupy that rental property. Rentals usually make great first-time homes. They're more affordable. And at whatever point the seller receives an accepted offer, accepts an offer from a buyer who intends in good faith to occupy the unit as their primary dwelling unit, the seller of the property then has the authority to serve that 90-day notice for the qualifying landlord reason of a property sale to a buyer who will occupy. The problems I've seen is, and I've done many of these notices, some of the offers I've seen, the accepted offers include the information that this will be owner occupied, and some don't. So I'm recommending that if the accepted offer does not indicate that you execute an affidavit indicating that the buyer will occupy. If the buyer, we're seeing a huge uptick, and I bet you can confirm this in buyers of duplexes who want to occupy one or both sides. I mean, more than 50% above anything we've ever seen before. And so, you know, what I'm seeing, this most recent client I've taken on is the realtor didn't know how to serve a notice. She checked that she had personally served the notice, and I said, so she handed a copy of this to each of the people? Oh no, she posted it on the door and mailed it. And I'm like, well, I don't think you even have the right to post and mail your notice. Do you? Do you have that legal right? She's like, well, what do you mean? And I looked in her and she doesn't have that legal right. I keep threatening that I will beat people over the head with my law book until I convince everyone to serve their notices by first class mail only and add 4 days for mailing to the termination date. It is by far the most legally secure way to serve a notice, and you're going to mess it up if you try to do it any other way.
Well,
tenant attorneys make their living off of exploiting these technical details that landlords mess up.
Yeah. And if you're a realtor, maybe don't serve notices at all. Let the seller do it.
You're giving legal advice and you don't have the right to.
Yeah. So I have a quick question though. What about posting for showings while the rental property is for sale? Can the realtor do that?
Certainly, yes. And 24-hour notice to enter is the one notice that doesn't have to meet those other service of notice requirements. So you're allowed, regardless of whether you have the right to post and mail, you're allowed to just post the notice on the door and give a true 24 hours to enter. If you do choose to mail the notice first class mail, not certified, not registered, I'm going to say that again, because that's another mistake I see people making, then you do have to add 3 days for mailing. So if you were to serve a notice today, the 24th, 25, 26, 27, that's your 3 days. 28 is your 24 hours. You can enter on the 29th.
Gotcha.
So yes, that's fairly safe. We are seeing a lot of denial of entry. Obviously, renters are not happy that they're going to be displaced, and who would be? Remember that is a violation of Chapter 90.322, and if a tenant unreasonably denies consent to enter.
Well, and it's very hard. I don't know how it is up in your area, but we have so many landlords that are selling now, and they're not being purchased by other investors, which was the normal course of things. And the housing shortage is exasperating the rental market because we have all these owner occupied people, multifamily units, duplex, threeplex, fourplex being purchased by groups of families who want to live together now, especially post corona. You know, they really want to be together. And then these poor tenants have nowhere to go. So
it's very true, and it's very heartbreaking. And I always recommend that landlords work into that end date at least a little flexibility for the tenant. You know, the other thing I want to bring up, and this is an issue that I'm facing with a client right now, is apparently mother and daughter both want to buy this duplex, but mother seems like, from the documentation I've seen, to be the only one on title. So she can't serve a 90-day notice to both sides to occupy. She could serve a 90-day notice to one side, move into that unit, and then terminate the other side. Once that's her primary residence, she could terminate the other side with a 60-day no cause notice. But we are seeing groups of families, like you said. I had one client, mom and dad, daughter and son-in-law, who were purchasing a duplex. All four were going to be on title. So that 90-day notice was allowed to be served to both sides of the duplex.
Interesting. So I do have one quick request of you. If you could give us your phone number and your website, because you are just an amazing resource.
Well, my phone number is available on my website. Let me just give that address. It's www.tiapoliti.com. My name is spelled Tiapoliti. So tiapoliti.com will get you to my website. You'll see my smiling face. I have a lot of articles available for free on my website, including one you realtors should be aware of called Pandemic Property Sales. It's my gift to the realtor community. Read it, have your buyers and sellers read it. That way you understand all the nuance of what it takes to sell a tenant occupied property.
We will grab that immediately and I'll put it up on my website too. Thank you, Tia. You're amazing. Love to have you back again. We're going to take a quick break. Say thank you to our sponsors. Do not touch that dial.
Thank you, Alice.
Well, welcome back, folks, to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lima here with Pete Belcastro. We're both brokers at John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon. We just finished a delightful and really informative interview with Tia Politi of Southern Oregon Rental House Association here in Oregon. And you know what's interesting, Pete, is because of the shutdown and opening up again and the moratoriums, it is having an effect on real estate. And I think it's definitely going to start showing up in our statistics.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. And how you find out, I know, but look at the price rise. The rental market, we've always said, follows the housing market in terms of rents, and if they go up, housing kinds of things, they all follow each other. And really, if that's true, then in the previous 3 months of April, May, and June, and I know we're at the end of July right now, but in those previous months, the median price in Jackson County rose almost 27%. Which is I've never seen it that high. So think about that. So the rental housing market, if it follows that as well, when the time comes, those rents are going to be rising because they tend to follow the market. So everything has an effect. Everything has dominoes effect. Everything has unintended consequences as well, as we know in real estate and in rental housing. And that's what we're seeing unfold before us. We simply don't have enough.
And the prices are really steep. If you're a tenant, boy, it's tough out there. And I'm curious to see in the next 12 months how our rental market fares as more and more landlords get out of the business. And we're not getting as many investors buying those properties. We're having regular homeowners, owner-occupied homeowners move into those. So on the one hand, if you're an investor, it could be a great time. But if you're a tenant, boy, my heart goes out to you.
And haven't we predicted that and talked about that for months? We've seen this train wreck coming, and it's here. There's no question about it. Well, think about this. I mean, the median price in Jackson County a year ago was $305,000. Okay, 305. Now it's 385,000.
Wow.
When you think about that, rural properties jumped up 23% during that time, Alice, and yet listings were still down, 37% a year ago. So a year ago, this July, we had 637 listings in Jackson County. Okay, we haven't had that many in a long time, because this time there was about just right at 399.
Wow.
So we're 37%, yet we're still selling. But people always want to know, well, what's selling? So let me just give you a little bit here. The 367 residential listings in Jackson County, Alice, again, there were 75 pending sales last week and 60 closed sales, which was actually down. But 10% of the market is homes under $500,000. I'm sorry, 10% of the sales are luxury. Let me start that over. Of those, most of those sales, as you know, is that $500,000 level. That's where we really break up in our market. It's been that way for a long time. That's still where the majority of sales are taking place each and every week. That has not changed. But if you're looking at 350,000, where most of those sales are 350 and 450 below that market, Ashland, they make up really a small part of the market, because the luxury home market still makes up over a quarter of our market. And if you're looking at 500,000 and above, that's where almost 60 to 65% of the listings are. So, that hasn't changed from month after week. We follow this, Alice. That really hasn't changed. But what I've noticed, and I think maybe you have too, is that days on the market, there's just homes that are on the market right now. They seem to be on there a little bit longer. Whether people have slowed down looking, whatever, we've hit that plateau of price increases, I think, and now we're kind of being more realistic on what we're going to price things in the future. Sellers need to know that, and so do buyers need to be aware where we are right now in the market.
Well, and I think the buyers are sensitive to those nuances week to week. The sellers, not so much, because they have numbers in their head, or they started their listing 1 or 2 months ago with that idea, that number in their mind. And they may be sitting there thinking, well, their house has 10 square feet more, or it has a beautiful counter, or this or that. But as markets start changing, whether it's going up or down, you want to keep up with it, especially if you're a listing and you're active, because you don't want to go into contract and then have the appraisal not pan out. Worse is you don't want to just languish on the market and then not get any offers at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and the closing sales, the 60 closing sales that took place, say, last week, they actually, again, they probably went into contract at least a month or 6 or 7 weeks ago. Right. Those are the ones closing right now, and that was when we were in a big frenzy. Remember, it was well, those average days in the market for those 60 homes, can you believe, we're 12 days, 12 days for those 60 homes. That is incredible in itself. So,
but it's not like that this week, and it wasn't like that last week. So it's changing as we speak.
It's not going to be that way next week either. So that's really, I think, that the cautionary tale there for sellers is that it has to be priced right. As you know, your pie in the sky does not work for anybody. You got to remember that. Be realistic about it. And then the same thing for buyers right now is be aware that the prices, these, as you do this, that prices have changed and fluctuated here, and that plateau maybe has been reached. And I think that's really good for everybody, because it really scares me of everything is that a 27% increase in value in a year is quite stunning for our region. And that also has a negative effect of the affordability issue. And that really concerns me more than things, because that's where so many people cannot then live here. And we don't want that to happen here, gentrify our communities where only certain kinds of people can live here. And that's what affordability and what crises do. And that's what we're heading to at 27% equity in 1 year. That can't happen year after year after year.
But don't you think that was just a reactionary event, a reaction to the COVID and then the fires? None of that was planned. It wasn't necessarily economically based. It was supply and demand, but it was temporary. And I don't want to use the word artificial, because it's real. Those numbers are real. But at the same time, it didn't grow because our wages grew. It didn't grow because our businesses grew. It grew in response to 2 events. And so now those events are behind us. Well, mostly behind us.
Well, when we compare, so you're comparing the first 3 months of the pandemic, actually, March, April, and May, or April, May, and June there, the beginning of the pandemic. Let's see what it does next month as we move through the pandemic. And then the fire season, remember, which is coming up, the year anniversary of the Alameda fires.
Yeah.
Let's see what it does beyond those as we move through the year here. It'll be interesting to see if it follows this pattern this time of that huge increase, or did we get back down to more reality? And boy, I would have I'm really mixed on that, and where that might fall. I really don't know.
So I think it's going to be a 5 to 10% settling off the highs.
Really?
But we'll see. We'll see if I'm right. We'll see if I'm right. That's my prediction. You guys know I love making predictions. So.
No, well, I think the demand has not changed. School's going to be starting soon. August is usually, a big a month for real estate. We're in that high point, remember, of the year right now. It's the sales season, August, and then we start sliding down after Labor Day and school starts again. So we've got a few more weeks to see where it goes.
Do we know for sure that school's starting? We're starting to do the mask thing again this week. So,
who knows? But we got to prepare for those.
We'll talk about it next week, though. That's why we do a weekly show.
Hey, good job today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a beautiful Southern Oregon weekend. Pete Belcastro, Alice Lima. Talk to you next week. Bye now.